Hey, and welcome back to another Twinmotion video. In this video, we're going to look at the latest update within Twinmotion, and that is 2023.2.2. So you might think that a second point 2 might not have the biggest of updates, but I was pleasantly surprised when I read the release notes, and that's exactly what we're here to do. We're going to share with you. So before we get into it, if at any point in this video you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. Really helps me out a lot. Also, do consider subscribing. That does as well. Okay, getting into it now. The very first thing that we want to look at is performance issues and improvements, especially that have come in the form of vegetation. And that is applied specifically whenever we go down to the populate and we actually apply this through paint or scattering. So let's just show you as an example what really happens. And it's going to be hard to show you that there's actually an improvement because it's actually going to work. I'm going to boost the diameter here all the way. We're going to go vegetation, trees. We're going to put a bunch of trees here. And of course, don't forget about your grass. Grass is one of the most important things as far as bringing some realism to your vegetation scatter. We can find that in grass. And I don't know, I tend to like the long grasses because they do cover quite a bit. But then we'll add some weeds. So as you can see, there's a lot in here. And I I really like to be a bit conservative when it comes to the vegetation scatter because it's very intensive on your hardware. I've got decent hardware, but whether you do or not, I would still be a bit cautious when you do this because you're literally just dumping vegetation everywhere. And but when it comes to this specific vegetation improvement, the fact is that the physical meshes for all the trees, all the everything that is created, trees, vegetation in general, within painting or scattering, they are not actually loaded, so they don't exist. And that doesn't mean a whole lot from what we see because we'll see everything as if it is, existed in the previous versions. This tool itself is going to operate the exact same. But what's different is we'll actually be able to have a true performance because there's not just the visual meshes that we see with the textures applied, but of course we'll see that, but the physical meshes that in a sense would be behind that you might use for collision in games or walkthroughs or things like that are not going to be there. And just kind of know that, and I'll show you that here in a second. But I'm going to literally just put the entire Amazon forest here, and it's kind of ridiculous. And I will say my hardware is having some issues, but I put everything there. That's fantastic. And the next thing I want to do is I want to put this grass at 100%, just to show you how insane this is. And like I said, your performance will vary, obviously, but I'm pleasantly surprised with the improvements. Generally speaking, I would not go to any lengths to scatter this amount of vegetation across this whole site. I'm basically framing in where I need to get specific shots or renders or fly-throughs, whatever it is. But I put that density at 100%. Let's put this size at 75, which will help a lot. And then maybe these clovers go up a bit more. So let's say 50%. So obviously we're very far away. We can't see it, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to fly down here, and you can barely see please wait work in progress. You'll see that if it's trying to generate and load the vegetation. But once it's done, the nice part is we have built a whole forest, and it is crystal clear. It is smooth. And there's our starting block that has vegetation all over it. That's beautiful, but it is just vast. It's extensive. So I want to show you this too, and basically proving that we do not have physical meshes here. I'm in a pedestrian mode, and typically, you're walking around, right? You're going to run into walls, you're going to run into physical objects. The idea here is that you would hit this tree, but in fact you don't. You fly through the tree, and who cares about that, right? I don't. You might if you're trying to be able to run into trees. If you're building something to where you'd require running into trees and have collision there, that's a different story. You're probably using Unreal Engine or something else like that. But I am completely impressed with the performance improvements, or at least the perceived improvements, because this is just crazy. So I'm totally impressed with this. That's really it for the first thing. Looking at the second thing here, we've got, if we go to the home screen here, we've always had kind of this nice home screen where you've got recent files and everything like that, templates and learning, but now we've got plugins. And it's so simple. If you were to create a new machine, you install Twinmotion, you launch it, and you realize, oh, I don't have my plugin, you'd have to, it was honestly hard to find the link in the past. But now every sort of link that you'd perfectly need as far as the plugin goes for any program you use with Twinmotion is right here. And so Obviously, if you're using Revit in 2024, which I am, you don't need anything. It's built into Revit. It will actually tell you right here, which is fantastic as well. But anything else you might need to download, and because there may not be a direct link. You can go to specific documentation up here at the top, or the whole plugins page, that was the link that was kind of hard to find in the past, and it moved around for a while. And you can always show this on startup or not. So that's really nice. Very simple stuff. Nothing too crazy. The next thing we want to look at is chromatic aberration. Definitely a cool effect. It's that colorful effect you get whenever you actually shoot with a camera, with a glass lens, and because glass lenses are not perfectly flat, you're going to get this curve, and therefore light going through curves you're going to get different colors, that kind of thing. So if I come into camera here in any sort of, I don't necessarily have to be in media mode, but I am for this. I can go to camera settings, and then I can see chromatic aberration. And if I turn, thankfully the default is 0, because if you have this at 100, you'll see you don't really want it. So that's absurd. But I put it at 100% because we can clearly see what's going on. Like as we get closer to the edge, i.e. where a glass lens would be bent, we're seeing the light cut through and create these different literal colors of the spectrum. So really cool stuff. Probably better to see this if we come over here to our pedestal, and I'm actually going to erase some of this vegetation. We don't need all of this right here. With that taken out, we can now really see the difference in the chromatic aberration. It does quite a lot there. Of course, as you see, you get closer to the edges, it makes a much bigger difference, and that's kind of the idea again. So very simple stuff. I like the idea that it exists. I can't say that it's an effect that I'm going for because of what I'm producing. Typically, it's an architectural visualization or something like that, and so I want more realism based on what the eye sees, not necessarily what a camera lens sees or the light that goes through a camera lens. So hey, I love that it's there. Bring in extra effects, so just kind of know that. Don't leave it at 100%. Walk around, at least you'll know where to find it now. All right, the next thing is materials. Nothing with materials specifically, but the materials dock itself. So I'm in this project, and by default there are none because it's just a default project, which is perfectly fine. But let's go to materials, and let's just put a glass in here. You can see, obviously, as I add new materials, they will populate here. I'm just going to keep changing the material of this base surface a few different times so we can see just a bunch of different materials populate here, and you'll see why in just a second. So the first thing here is that we've got this filter button, and it's fantastic because maybe you want to see just glass materials. And if you've ever worked in Twinmotion before, especially if materials are imported, which generally speaking they are, that's a good and bad thing, obviously, but especially if they are imported, you're going to have a ton here. And so once you press glass, you're now going to be filtered down to only materials that are glass. And that's great. And so you can see by default, we only have standard and glass, and obviously standard includes everything but that one glass material. So the quest here now is to find what are the other different categories, that we could actually filter by. Well, you could try some of these different man-made things. That doesn't work. The most luck that I've had here is if we come over, and not grids either, surprisingly, we come over to fabric. There's some fabric. Hey, look, there's actually fabric. And moving over some more, roof coverings. Is that one? Nope, that's not. Keep moving on. Obviously, fabric, leather. You would think leather is not. Moving down some more, neons or emissives definitely are. If we make that a emissive color, we can see it shows up as emissive. You would think neon based on the folder name there, but emissive works all the same. That's what really more of the native name that we're used to seeing there. My guess is water does as well. If we turn this into water, yes, water does too. Going back to materials, that's cool. Subsurface, these are obviously materials that might show up behind another one. Yep, that does as well. So this gives you a really good idea of, let's see, car paint. Yep, car paint does as well. Gives you an idea of what to expect and the different things you can truly filter by. One last thing here is the Adobe Substance materials. They do too, which is fantastic. They have their own, even with a new icon, the Substance icon, which is great. I like this. So even extending beyond the material, built-in Twinmotion materials tool itself, Other external materials, let's actually, for the sake of this, let's go to the surfaces within Megascan to see if a Megascans, any one of these, let's go ahead and download this one and see if this one will populate in here. No, my guess is that this is more of like a native Twinmotion material in that it is considered a standard material. And the way you know it's a standard material is, first of all, let's uncheck some of these. We can basically see only our standard materials, and you'll notice that I would say that more than half of the materials that you're probably going to use most of the time are standard. And that just means that you're going to have your standard color, UV roughness, metallic, and basically everything else here, but most of the time normal definitely you'll want to use. But if we start to compare some of the differences, clearly we've looked at glass before, and it's going to have some of the same things, but most of these are, it's nice that they're going to categorize as different. Clearly water is really not going to, it's going to have completely different properties. So that's the main thing here, that we're going to have completely different properties. Obviously substance is going to have its own set of different properties, so that's really nice. Okay, so the next tool that we have within the materials right here is that we have this tool with a lovely broom, and this is going to clean up. And so what is that? You click it, and every material that is not used in your project is going to be instantly deleted. Now, do I like that? Absolutely, yes. Oh my gosh. If you've ever worked in Twinmotion before, again, you get all these imported materials, again, that you do want, because typically what the workflow being that you want to replace those materials. But on top of that, what ends up happening is that you replace it and you re-import. Sometimes they come back in, sometimes they don't. That's generally fixed now, so they shouldn't come back in. But you basically end up having this big pool of materials that just sit there unused and just bogging down your file. So we can, with one click here, we're good. And you can clearly see what we have. We've used that glass and whatever this ridiculous material is, limestone, and that's it. This whole scene is just two materials, and it really, I've just been trading materials in and out, that type of thing. You can see I can get a bunch here, but obviously you know that it's in use if you see this check mark, that we kind of know that. But we can clean it again and see, yeah, that's perfect. Like, who doesn't love that? That's just amazing. Again, along the lines of materials, another feature that's very, very small, very tiny, but very nice nonetheless is, let's look at this substance material. If you're familiar with the seeds, we've had random seeds, so you can input a number between, I don't know if it's any 9,999. It's kind of some ridiculous number, and if you don't know what a seed is, it's just taking all the properties that you've set and applying a different look using the same properties. So it's just like a different version of the same properties, that type of thing, iterations, whatnot. But what they've done here is literally put one button that just randomizes the seed. So you could see, oh, well, actually, you could clearly see it's like between 0 and 100,000. So the number of seeds are absurd, but you can just get a random seed right there, which is great. If you maybe don't like the look of this particular shot of the material, again, this is only substance, so it is what it is, but it's really nice. Just a quick one click and you get a different seed. Very simple stuff, but really cool. Okay, this, obviously, we start to get into the pretty world here. Let's go ahead and put that wood there. It's nice. The world of ambiance. We always love ambiance, don't we? Go ahead and quit media mode and we go to the ambiance of our basic scene here. But the difference is that we have a value that we now did not have, and that's involving the weather, and particularly when it comes to rain and wet. We actually have a wetness value, which, I mean, my gosh, who doesn't want a wetness value in their life? I'm glad I at least have it in Twinmotion, and I'm glad I have control over it too. Here we can see we have our surface effects. We've had that before, and we have had our precipitation, brightness boosting if we feel like we need to do that. We've had that before, but now within our surface effects, we have a wetness value itself. And so this will not come into play at all unless we literally do have wetness to control, and we obviously need to have some sort of rain here or snow. We can try snow in just a second, but rain, you're clearly going to understand what's going on. So thankfully all of these are zeroed out by default, but this is kind of the view we've been stuck with and used to literally since the conception of Twinmotion when it comes to rain and visuals and everything. And we get these nice puddles and water and reflections. Like, it's really nice. But I'll tell you what, the difference between this and being able to turn this wetness value up and watch essentially the puddles grow, it's amazing. So something I noticed in just fiddling around here is we have wetness size, we've got puddle size. And so I understand the difference. It makes sense, but you could almost treat these as kind of like inverse values. And so I'm going to put this wetness value back to 0 and change this puddle size a bit. So you can see obviously the puddle size goes up and whatever. So point is, if we go max out the puddle size, we basically have one giant puddle, like water everywhere, which is great. It's cool. But let's put this back to 0 and putting wetness up to 1, essentially the same effect. I will say it's not quite a puddle. It's just everything is wet, so take that for what it is. That's a lot more powerful than just the puddle size itself. Obviously, we can max them both, and it's essentially like a full layer of water on top of any material, which that is fantastic. Any horizontal material, that's great. So, but let's actually go ahead and inverse this, and if I put the wetness all the way down to essentially -1, so it's like negative wetness. The fact that we have the puddle size at 1, it stays. We still really just have that water everywhere. So obviously we can literally remove the wetness and puddles, but continue to see the rain. We can boost that precipitation here, that type of thing. But this is obviously unnatural, so we would have some sort of wetness or puddle size. But if we put the puddle size all the way down and the wetness all the way up, then we almost don't have puddles. I mean, it looks like we do because we're reflecting in the distance, but we don't really have puddles. It's just that the surface itself is essentially reflected, but it's wet. It just looks wet. But the second that we start to produce actual puddles, then we have literally sitting water. So it's intuitive and makes sense, but in a sense, you got to play with it because it is a bit inversely related, because you can kind of get the same effect, but just know what you're doing. You're going to really see it there. But obviously, you may not have these values maxed out one way or the other, so just kind of know that. But something I do really like about this is that we have a lot more control when it comes to this, because what I might want to do, and a lot of times what I'm going to want to do, is maybe I want this particular shot, but I want this puddle to literally be somewhere else. I have the option of doing that, physically moving this around within the shot, with this offset X and Y, because I can literally move this puddle, which is amazing. That's just amazing. And obviously it's so simple. Like if I want this puddle to kind of bleed off the edge of this step, I can do that. If I want it to look dry, it's fantastic. This is really cool stuff. Obviously very simple stuff. Easy to use, easy to slide a couple sliders. So really great. Now finally, we have parallax. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off. We have parallax on decals, which I do find quite interesting. I don't end up using decals all that much, but if you're really getting into the weeds of making a scene look natural, you're probably going to have some sort of decal. So first of all, where do we find these decals? We can find them in objects and decals. So there's a bunch here, and clearly maybe we like these, maybe we don't. Some of these are useful, some of them are definitely not. Clearly, it's funny, we have puddles now. We've always had puddles, but we just saw we have really nice looking puddles. But so let's say a manhole. Manhole, that's fine there. It looks good. So what's really new when it comes to decals? Well, obviously we've had the decal here. We've had kind of the depth before. That's nothing too new. But what is new is that we do have the ability to add a normal map that we've had before. But the main thing is parallax. We can add parallax, and whenever I check this, you won't necessarily see what parallax, you won't see the change necessarily, because what we need is a height map, and it needs to read the height map in order to give us a parallax effect. So what I'm going to do is first show you how to make a custom decal. And first of all, what I would do here always is I would duplicate this in case you want this manhole or not. I'm not so worried about this manhole, so I am going to kind of save over it. So we can come over here to our color, and basically it acts the same as the material. So the material itself, or like the color map or the base or whatever you see color-wise, is literally the manhole itself, and it's going to be found in the color map, in the details, and the texture there. So I can open this, and me opening this, I'm going to change it to my logo. Pressing open will give us that look, and it's not that great. I promise you, it really isn't. But we want to add a little bit of parallax to this. So, and we definitely don't have that right now. Like I said, we don't have a height map. But what we're going to do is come over to Photoshop and basically create a real cheap version of a height map. One way to do this very easily is you can go to Filter. If you click on the layer, you can go to Filter, 3D and generate bump or height map. I don't think Photoshop is going to keep these 3D features too much longer, but I've used it a lot because it's like literally one click to get a bump or a height map and a normal map. And these are things that you can use to create literally custom materials in Twinmotion and add that depth. So unfortunately, my logo is gray. It kind of is a height map already, but if you're going to make kind of a real cheap version of a height map, we can go to our curves, and there's really any way to do this, but I've found a lot of success doing this, and you basically just want to create more contrast. I might want to introduce some true blacks or true whites, more so in that way, just so I can make it a bit more dramatic. And the whole idea is that whites are higher, darks are lower, that, you're trying to create more contrast, more, that because we'll actually be able to see the contrast. So let's go ahead and export this as a PNG. And with that saved, we can come back to Twinmotion and the height map. Obviously you can see there's no height map there, but I can open this up and I can navigate to where that should be. And there we go. Once that's loaded in, you can see I immediately got some parallax. I'm going to uncheck that and zoom in here, and we can see the difference as we zoom in here, just by checking this parallax on. That's kind of absurd, but I will say the effect there is, it's pretty jarring, pretty interesting nonetheless. But you can see by default the intensity is at 50%, so we can turn that down if we don't want it as intense. Obviously we can boost it up, but it literally looks like that my logo is imprinted into the ground. It's a very poor job of it, I might say, but it is nonetheless. And then you can change the height map reference plane, basically where it is. And so where does it fall? It's like, where is 100%? So this is kind of more playing with your eyes than anything, because it's still flat on this surface, but what's really happening is that it looks like it's falling somewhere else. So like, is it further down or is it further up? 0% is kind of as high as it can go, and then 100%, I think by default, is kind of pressed down more, which I think that's, obviously varies based on the look you want, but you could clearly see how nice this is. Inverting this is actually really helpful in this case, so we could see this a little more clearly. And that does have a direct impact whether you have a normal map. So I don't have a normal map implied. You could see it's just pulling from the manhole. So definitely have all of this updated. If I were going to make a true decal, I would remove all of these so that I could just see what I'm looking at, and not necessarily all these imprints and impressions from the manhole itself. But nonetheless, you can see how this works and how nice this is to have, because decals were great. They're really easy to place and throw around, but now you can literally get that depth from something that's 2D, really easy to throw around. Like, it doesn't matter where this goes. It's so nice and easy. It really makes such a difference. So that is really awesome. Okay, with that, we have looked at everything new within 2023.2.2. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm surprised about the 0.2.2. My gosh. Not a lot of big things, but small little things, they add up a lot, and that's kind of the point. That's why we're here. So I will say, if you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It really, really helps me out a lot. Also, do subscribe, because that does as well. I hope you have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next Twinmotion video. Thanks for watching.